Hi again. Today we're going to discuss issues that deal with business to business marketing. Okay, well, in the last lecture we were discussing consumer behavior issues that will be important for understanding how customers make decisions about the purchase of products and services. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing, but when it comes down to businesses. So we understand that businesses are comprised of people, and because of that, a lot of the things that we have discussed about people, about final consumers, they are going to also apply to businesses because the decisions made within businesses are carried out by people themselves. However, businesses operate differently in many ways, and because of that, there is an added layer of complexity and slightly different decision-making processes that are going to happen within businesses. So today we're going to discuss some of those differences. Let me start by discussing a few ways in which business markets are actually different than final consumer markets. So first, let's start discussing how the market structure and the actual demand function is a little bit different when it comes down to businesses. First, maybe the more obvious part is that businesses tend to be larger when it comes down to the purchasing orders than individual consumers are. Even if you're a big fan of a product, you probably buy only a small amount of it compared to what a business would do for the same thing. So, for example, if you need ink for your printer, maybe if you print a lot, you might replace your ink cartridge once a month. So, at the end of the year, let's say, you will buy 12 cartridges of ink for your printer. A business that has hundreds or maybe thousands of people working for them will replace ink cartridges a lot faster than you. So just the sheer order size, it's going to be different. So there are few businesses, but they buy large, sometimes huge amounts of products and services. Okay, that's the first step. The second part is the demand for products within a business is different. It is derived. What does derived mean? It means that the products, for example, let's say that you're a furniture manufacturer. If you're a furniture manufacturer, you will have demand for raw materials to make that furniture. For example, you will buy maybe dimensional lumber, wood. Now, that demand is derived. It's not that you buy dimensional wood because you like wood or you're gonna consume wood. It's because you are trying to make furniture for somebody else, in this case, the final consumer, that you're actually buying the demand. Okay. And what that does is it makes your demand more inelastic. The fact that it's derived. What do I mean by inelastic? Well, uh, if you are making furniture, you're not going to be able to substitute wood for something else easily. And the reason why is because what you know how to do is make furniture, right? So given that you are in the furniture business, it's going to be hard for you to substitute some of the raw materials that you need. And because of that, your demand, your willingness to basically pay higher prices for some of those raw materials, it's going to be not changing much when the prices go up. So it's going to be inelastic. And and also, another thing that happens with this is because demand is derived, it's also going to fluctuate quite a bit. So the decisions to buy the products and services that you use to run the business are going to be a function of when people buy your products. And like I said, because your demand is going to be a function of the customers, what's going to happen is if uh, there is any seasonality, for example, within the demand from the customer side, it's going to have a huge impact and it's going to essentially multiply that seasonality effect for you. An example of this, for example, would be toy manufacturers, right? So in the United States, 60 to 70% of all purchases for toys happen between November and January. Okay, so for those 2 months, the bulk of demand for the entire industry happens in that period. So that's gonna make basically the planning schedule and the demand of raw materials fluctuate pretty widely for the manufacturers if there are any changes or anything happens within the marketplace. Now, let's discuss big picture how the process of buying anything happens within an organization. Let's start kind of at the middle of this diagram. Uh, One of the key concepts is going to be this idea of the buying center. So the buying center is going to be a team of people that are going to make the decision about buying uh, either products or services that are needed for the operation of the business. And what we're going to talk in today's lecture a little bit is what kind of factors are going to determine uh, the kind of purchase decisions that that buying center, that team of people within the organization are going to make. And also we're going to discuss briefly uh, what kind of outcomes we're going to have from that buying process. Okay. So let's start with discussing the different types of buying situations or buying decisions. What's going to happen within the organization is that there are going to be three fairly distinct buying situations. The first one is a straight rate buy. This is when you are buying a product or a service that you are usually buying as it is, and you have already established protocols, processes, and probably prefer suppliers. So in that situation, what's going to happen is, let's say that, for example, you make tablets. So it may be that your preferred chip maker for that tablet is AMD. So in that situation, you probably have some sort of contract negotiated with AMD, and what that's going to enable you to do is, let's say that every month you buy 10,000 units of whatever chip goes into that tablet. Well, you're going to basically do a straight rebuy every month unless the situation changes, unless you modify the design of the tablet. It's going to be an ongoing process where essentially what you do is when you need the product, you're just going to put on an order. Okay, so it's basically a routine process that happens without any modifications. Okay, then you have modified rebuy. This is when, for whatever reason, there are some changes that need to happen, but they are small changes. Like, for example, it may be that you're realizing that the prices of your suppliers are actually not as competitive as you thought, right? So in that situation, maybe you want to call your supplier and negotiate those prices. By the way, this is an important distinction between business to business and business to consumer, is that most of the buying scenarios, especially with middle and large businesses, will require negotiation in price. Oftentimes, you're just not going to buy something straight out of a catalog with a given price because the buying orders are large, and this will enable businesses to negotiate. Okay, but it doesn't have to be just price. It could be that you need to change the specs of the product, maybe the terms of payment. Another important aspect in business to business is the fact that oftentimes you will not pay right away. You will just have an invoice sent to you, and you will pay maybe 30 days later, maybe 60 days later, maybe 90 days later. So you are actually using your relationship with your suppliers as a way of financing your business because you don't need to pay right away. Okay, and finally, we have a different type of purchase, which is going to be a new task. And a new task is going to be a very involved process that is going to involve maybe drafting a request for proposals, like asking maybe multiple suppliers to send you what kind of specs they can actually provide for you, what kind of terms of payment, what kind of prices they can actually deliver. And based on all this information and maybe more, you're just going to make a new decision, but this might take months or even a year in some industries. Okay, so at the core of making decisions within a business is this idea of the buying center, which is basically the team uh, of people that go about making the decision within the organization. Now, this is going to vary quite a bit from small business to a large organization. A small business, if you have one or two people in the business, this is going to look a lot like in business to consumer, that the processes we have discussed, because there's only one or two people involved, obviously. So whatever we've said before, it's going to apply here. But when it comes down to large organizations, the buying center is going to look different. There's going to be a large number of people that actually play a part into the decision making process, and they are going to play different roles. Okay, so they're going to have different roles. So let's discuss some of those roles. We have them here. So let's start with the user, right? So we might have, for example, a construction company where we are providing some tools for some of the workers. In a situation like that, the user will be the person that actually is going to use the saw that I'm going to be buying for them, right? So if it's a carpenter or a framer, somebody who it's working on the construction site, and they're going to be using the product, right? So they're going to have opinions about the product, right? And we might want to take that feedback and that information before we make a decision about the tool. Okay. There might be also influencers, right? So if it's a large enough organization, they might have an engineering, they might have an engineer that is in charge of making sure that the tools that are provided for the workers are actually working as intended. Maybe they can do some testing on the quality of the tools, right? And obviously that will influence the decision that is made regardless of what the input is from the users, right? Then there might be a different person or people, it depends on the organization, that are going to be the ones that give the go ahead to the decision. Okay, and this might not be technical people, they might be just a manager that is in charge of making decisions on large purchases. Okay, and it also will vary if the decision is small. This decision might be decentralized, it might be up to maybe one of the departments, but if it's a larger decision that is made for the entire organization, it might be more centralized. And then there's going to be a different group of people that are the ones that actually put on the purchases, okay, that make the calls to the suppliers, and they fulfill the purchase, and they may be negotiating some of the prices, for example. Okay, that that might be a different group of folks. And then finally, we have another important role to consider, which is this idea of the gatekeeper. And this can take different forms in different organizations, but let me give you an example. For example, if you're trying to get in contact with the decider that it's making decisions in a large organization, that might be, for example, an executive vice president or a director of a department, it's actually going to be hard for you to get in contact with them, like if you're a salesperson for one of the potential tool manufacturers, because they're going to have an assistant or a secretary, right, that is going to be controlling the flow of information to this person, right? That's what we mean by gatekeepers, right? They control the flow of information. So if you want to send an email to somebody who is up in the organization, getting that email address is going to be hard. And even if you acquire that email address, oftentimes their assistant is going to be the one going through the emails and then passing to this decider, essentially, who what emails are actually important at this time. So unless you can get by these gatekeepers, you're not going to be able to have a conversation with the deciders. Okay, so now that we have discussed who the actors are within the buying process, let's discuss what kind of factors are going to determine what the outcome is. So we're going to talk about environmental factors. Okay, we're going to break this down in the next few slides. Okay, we're going to talk about organizational factors, interpersonal factors, and finally individual factors, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, these decisions are going to be made by people, even though the organization is going to set a set of procedures and processes in place to try to uh, lead the direction in a way that is consistent with the objectives of the firm. Individuals are going to be the ones making the decision at the end of the day. First, I'm going to single out what are the key determinants of most of the decisions within businesses. And then we're going to talk more broadly about other factors that could be important as well. Okay, first is economic factors. So one of the things that you will observe in businesses is that the economics of the decisions, because the purchases are so large, are going to play an absolutely key role. Okay, and when it comes down to the economic aspects, one of the key factors is going to be price. So a lot of the decisions that are made by organizations are going to have a very heavy leaning when it comes down to prices, because you're buying really large quantities, reducing the price even by a small amount, it's going to have a huge impact in the profitability of the organization. Also, remember that when I'm talking about price, this might also be oftentimes the willingness for your suppliers to be working with you in terms of price, and that might mean negotiation, maybe determining prices that are decreasing over time as you buy more and more units for the product. So it's not just a set price, it's the process by which you achieve a price advantage. And this is going to be a complex uh, price negotiation and price setting scheme, usually in most of the large purchases within organizations. And then the second aspect that is going to be particularly important when it comes down to business is going to be service, something that maybe for a lot of consumers is less relevant, especially for those that are more price sensitive. Like you will think in the case of organizations, service plays an important role. Why? Because for the organization or for the business, the products that you're buying, let's say from a vendor or from a supplier, they are going to be intricately related to the profitability of the firm and the operations of the firm. So let me give you an example. Imagine that you have a laptop, right? And if you use that laptop for, I don't know, listen to some of these lectures, to surf the web, maybe do make some online purchases, maybe you also work on your term papers on that laptop, and I don't know, any other thing that you use the laptop for, if for whatever reason the laptop breaks, right? And well, it will be slightly uncomfortable situation because now you will actually have to go to the library and maybe use some of the hardware that is available there until you can maybe get enough money to buy another laptop or take the laptop to get fixed. And it might take a week or two until they can actually isolate the problem and fix it for you. So in that situation, because you're using the computer for personal use, it will be inconvenient, but it's not a big deal. So service will be nice to have, but it's not essential. Now, if the same thing happens within an organization, and let's say that the laptop stop working for one department, or maybe a more realistic scenario, the network falls down within the organization because the company is running their operations based on the assumption that that network of computers is going to be functioning, the impact it has for the organization is very dramatic. So having good service, maybe it's good support that enables you to just call a vendor and have them be there maybe within 1 or 2 hours trying to fix the problem, or maybe in the case of a network, remotely logging in into your machine so they can actually fix the problem right away. That extra service is particularly valuable because it will enable the company to have more resilient operations and be able to maybe function better. And then you are more willing to pay for that service than what a final consumer will be. Okay. But one thing that we cannot forget that I was mentioning already is that these decisions uh, are made by individuals. And because of that, personal factors do play a role, and particularly emotions, right? So if you really strongly dislike the rep, like the representative from one of the firms that is bidding on a contract, even if their economic terms are really good, you may be still swayed by the fact that you really strongly dislike the person. Okay, maybe because they give you the wrong vibe, right? And these emotional aspects cannot be emphasized sufficiently, right? Because at the end of the day, the people that are making these decisions still human beings, and they still get pushed by emotional and psychological aspects like any other person making decisions. So when you strongly dislike a brand, even if their product is good, you still won't buy it, right? So the same thing is going to happen in a business to business. Now, these are the key factors. Now, let's discuss some other factors that are also going to play a role. First, like we were talking about in the diagram, we have the environmental factors, and there are many of them, right? I'm not going to run through all of them. I will just point at a couple, okay? And so, for example, something that maybe plays less of a role in business to consumers that it's in here is the cost of money, right? When you're making such large purchases like organizations do, the interest rate that you can get to finance those purchases actually does play a role, Okay, this will also play a role in business to consumer environment when you're, for example, buying expensive goods, like for example a house, right? So in that situation, the cost of money matters when it comes down to organizations, even if you're just buying paper, right? If you're buying enough of it, right? And then, if your purchases of paper are in the millions, because I don't know, because you're a book publisher, right? So you need to actually buy large quantities of paper. In a situation like that, the cost of money is going to be important when it comes down to decision making. So, for example, if one of your vendors of paper is going to give you longer terms of payment, that's going to basically make the cost of money less relevant. So if interest rates are high, which by the way is not the case right now, interest rate at a historic low, right? And we all know that if we read the news. But if they were high in a situation like that, somebody who gives you better terms of payment will actually have an advantage when it comes down to basically buying that particular product, right? Uh, Other important aspects could be politics, for example. So large businesses oftentimes try to influence politicians. So you will hire lobbyists. So, for example, if you're Disney, right? Disney has dedicated staff that basically lobby for different aspects of uh, their organization in Washington, D.C., right? So there are people that what they do is they try to convince politicians to pass laws that are friendly to the business that they operate in, or to discourage the politicians from passing laws that are actually negative for their organization. Okay, and then other than that, obviously, other aspects like with uh, consumers are going to matter, like the demand for the product, right? So how in vogue it is, how the economy is looking like, right? So if you have a strong economy, you're going to make more purchases, right? Etc. Etc. Another factor that it's going to determine the buying process within a business to business environment is going to be organizational factors. And these are varied and it's going to change from company to company, but essentially are things like what objectives are what objectives are the company trying to establish, right? So, for example, if you have a company like Walmart involved into the buying process, what's going to happen is one of the key factors for them is going to be price, right? Because they're trying to be a loss leader, right? They're trying to be uh, the price leaders within their space. So, because of that, if you're selling anything to Walmart, the pricing negotiation is going to be tough, right? So the objectives of the organization are going to determine oftentimes a lot of the terms and conditions that actually determine what the strategies are to accomplish those objectives, right? What kind of structures they have set in place, right? So, for example, Walmart, that's something that I consider to be interesting. So, a lot of the purchase decisions from Walmart are actually outsourced to some other suppliers. So, for example, Walmart has relationships with Procter and Gamble that will actually have, if you work for Procter and Gamble and you are one of the middle managers, there is a chance, actually a good chance, that you'll end up working in Walmart headquarters for some time, because what Walmart has done is they have outsourced inventory and purchase decisions with some of their preferred vendors like Procter and Gamble, such that instead of Walmart putting on the orders for the quantities that are needed for the different stores, it's Procter and Gamble the one that is in charge of doing that, right? So these structure and systems that are in place are very unique to this store, in this case Walmart, and this supplier agreement, in this case Procter and Gamble, right? So this could actually be quite complex. Okay, and then we have interpersonal factors, right? So let's not forget that at the end of the day, we're dealing with individual reps like salespeople and individual deciders in the company, right? So what's going to be important in these decisions? Well, how the salesperson, for example, is portrayed, or what image do they project into others, right? And this is going to be a function of, for example, their expertise, right? How well do they actually know their product line, right? Are they really truly an expert in these products? Can they talk about technical aspects? Because remember, some of the products that we're talking about are rather complex, and it's not something that you buy every day necessarily, right? So because of that, being an expert in the area is particularly important. In fact, a lot of the authority is derived from the expertise, but also from their position within the organization, right? So if you are dealing with somebody who is high up enough in the organization that can actually make decisions, that's going to enable these purchases to actually happen easier, right? And with authority comes influence. Okay. Plus, you need to understand the dynamics of the firm, because what's going to happen is in certain firms, different groups within the buying center are going to play a more prevalent role. So if you're dealing with a company like DuPont, who traditionally has been very heavily influenced by the science and technical aspects of their products, probably you know that what the lead engineer has to say uh, in that group is going to be a lot more heavily weighted than in other organizations where maybe it's more about price. Okay, so you need to understand the subtle dynamics uh, within the buying decision process. And finally, we have individual factors. And we have a whole host of factors here that could influence um, the decision making. But consider this, oftentimes what we do, so we have here, for example, age, income, education, all these aspects are important because of many reasons, but one of them is because we tend to like people that are similar to us. So if we are actually doing business with an organization that has a sales representative or somebody in the buying center that it's similar to us, maybe they went to the same college, they are similar age, they have had similar experiences, right? We are more likely to bond with them, to establish a relationship at a human level, okay? And because of that, we are going to be more likely to wanna go ahead and buy things from that organization. So oftentimes in the literature, you will see discussed that uh, business to business decisions are a lot more rational than in the case of business to consumers, where you just buy something because you just happen to like it, right? There's not a lot of rationale for it. It's not about the numbers oftentimes with consumers, but that is also true when it comes down to business to business. In fact, one of the key skills that you can have if you are a salesperson in business and in general if you're a manager cutting any type of deals, it's going to be golf, right? So playing golf, it's essential because a lot of the conversations, at least in the United States, um, are going to actually happen around the tee, right? So it's a lot of these intangibles that should make no difference if it was purely rational, but it's because they are made by people. They are just going to be determined to a fairly large degree by how much you like people in general. Now, the actual buying process within organizations is going to look pretty similar uh, in process to the one with consumers, but it's going to be a little bit longer and have a few terms that are slightly different. Although, as you will see, what happens during those stages is going to be similar that was happening with final consumers, right? So first we start with the problem recognition, no surprise there, it's the same as with consumers. Okay, next what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a general need description. So we're gonna have to write down a document because it's an organization and multiple people are involved, that it's gonna describe what the decision is. Sorry, what the decision that needs to be made is, right? And it's gonna basically outline this problem that we have recognized, right? Then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to write basically the specs of the product or service. So what kind of features or benefits need to be fulfilled in order for this purchase to go ahead. So, and this, again, it's going to be written formally because multiple people need to actually be aware of what's happening within the organization, whether it's the users, deciders, and or purchasers, right? And then probably somebody in the buying center is going to be in charge of calling multiple suppliers and talking to them about whether they can actually fulfill the specs that have been already requested, and if they can do that, how much of the product can they provide at what different times. Oftentimes notice that these products are not standard, and because of that they need to be specifically made for the organization. So that means that lead times, like how early you need to make on an order before you can actually get the product, might be quite long. So you're going to have a long conversation with suppliers. It's not just looking at a catalog and buying the product. Sometimes it's that, but oftentimes it's not. Okay. Then what you're going to do from the suppliers that pass the initial uh, screening is going to be proposal solicitation. So you're going to ask them to send you a proposal of what they can do in terms of specs, in terms of lead times, in terms of payment, etc., etc. So everything is going to be outlined, price, of course, right? So what they can deliver. Then based on this proposal and also your previous experiences with these suppliers, some of them might actually be preferred suppliers within the organization. In fact, some companies will not allow you to put on a proposal unless you've been pre-screened by the organization, because they don't trust anybody that says they can do something, right? Because these are large organizations that have difficult to fulfill requirements, right? So then what you're going to do is you're going to try to come up with a selection process where you're going to look at all the pros and cons from the proposals that have been provided and see which one should be the winning option, okay, based on all the trade-offs that are important for the organization and risks, especially with newer suppliers. Okay, and then you're going to determine what the order specification is going to be, right? Especially if it's a product or a service that you're going to be receiving on a regular basis, right? Where you're going to have multiple straight rebuys, right? So you're going to determine, some sort of scheme or schedule that is going to determine how much of the product or service is going to be provided and how frequently it's going to be ordered. Okay, and then finally, to close in the loop, you're going to do a performance review. You're going to check that actually what the supplier said that they were going to be able to provide for us, they did deliver on. Okay, so the specs are going to be checked. So you might have quality control engineers that will actually make sure that you're getting the things that you said you were going to be getting. Also, in terms of payments, right? In terms of delivery, so you're gonna go in accounting and see, did they allow me to pay in the terms that we agreed to? Did they actually pay, right? Etc. Etc.